My family chose Paris over my emergency surgery and posted finally no drama. When I woke up to 65, missed calls, not one asked if I was alive. Then I found the bank statements in my jacket pocket. The first thing I heard when I came back was ticking, not a monitor. Not the hushed machinery of a hospital room clicking through its routines, a pocket watch, brass, the kind with a hunter case that snaps shut with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. It was sitting on my hospital tray, 6 inches from my face, and I understood before I was fully conscious that someone had placed it there deliberately, so it would be the first thing I heard before I saw anything at all. My grandfather was asleep in the chair beside my bed. He was 81 years old and still in his white dress shirt, the one he'd ironed himself the morning of my pinning ceremony, the one with the brass watch chain visible against the pocket. He'd been there for 2 days. I would find out later that he had not gone home, that he'd slept in that chair for 47 hours, woken periodically by nurses who brought him coffee and didn't have the heart to ask him to leave, that he had signed my surgical consent forms alone, his hand shaking because there was no one else to sign them. I reached for my phone on the tray beside the watch, my mother's Instagram, posted 9 hours after my surgery. A photograph of the Eiffel Tower at golden hour, champagne glasses in the foreground, my mother and brother and his wife Sloane arranged in the frame like people who have been practicing looking happy. My sister-in-law's caption, family trip to Paris. Finally, no stress, no drama. I set the phone face down on the tray. The watch ticked, and I started doing what nurses do. I assessed the situation, identified the problem, and figured out exactly what needed to happen next. My name is Greta Briggs. I'm 31 years old. I am a registered nurse, though the first time that title was officially mine. I was unconscious on the floor of an auditorium with a perforated gastric ulcer, and approximately 45 minutes between me and the kind of outcome they don't let you walk away from. I paid my own way through nursing school. That's not a complaint, it's a fact. The way your blood type is a fact. The way the square footage of the apartment you can afford on a nursing student's income is a fact. I worked night shifts at an urgent care clinic during my 2nd and 3rd years. I drove 40 minutes each way every Sunday to my grandfather's house in Millbrook to sort his weekly medications into the labeled organizer on his kitchen counter and make sure his prescriptions were current and his refrigerator had food in it. That drive was not an obligation. It was the best part of my week. Walter Briggs, Grandpa Walter, was a retired union electrician who had spent 38 years running wire through buildings that still stood, and who carried a brass pocket watch his own father had given him in 1971, and who had a mind at 81 that was sharper than most people's at 40. He read 2 newspapers a day, physical copies, and could recite the provisions of his union pension agreement from memory, in the way people recite things they've had reason to know by heart. He was the person who had told me, at 17, that I was going to be good at something that mattered. He had been specific about it. Not famous, he said. Not rich. Good at something that matters. I can already see it. He was the only member of my family who came to my graduation. He was the only member of my family who was always going to come. My mother, Diane Briggs, had power of attorney over his financial accounts. She'd obtained it 6 months before my graduation, just for emergencies, she told him, just while things were uncertain. His health was fine. What was uncertain, I now understood, was whether he'd noticed the transfers before they were large enough to matter. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd been studying for my NCLEX licensing exam for 6 weeks when I unmuted the family group chat by accident. It was a Thursday in March. I was at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. with a review book and a cold cup of coffee, and my thumb hit the wrong notification, and 47 messages loaded at once. Restaurant lists, spa bookings, a thread about airport lounge access, my brother Brett comparing first-class upgrade prices on 2 different airlines. Paris, we deserve this. Mom, just book it. My mother's reply, a string of heart emojis and already on it. My pinning ceremony was May 20th. The trip ran May 18th through May 25th. I scrolled through 47 messages. I read everyone. Not a single message mentioned my graduation. Not a single message mentioned me at all. Not in the context of the trip conflicting with something. Not in the context of anyone having considered the date and decided the trip was more important. I simply did not exist in those 47 messages. I was not a factor that had been weighed and dismissed. I was a factor that had not been entered into the calculation. 3 days later, my mother texted me separately, not in the group chat, privately. Honey, we're going to be traveling that week. Would you be able to stay at Grandpa's? He really shouldn't be alone that long. Not, we're so sorry we'll miss your ceremony. Not, we know this is terrible timing. Just an assignment. Delivered the way you'd ask someone to water your plants. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I texted back, I'll make sure he's covered. I did not say I would stay there myself. I called my grandfather's neighbor, Mrs. Petra Halverson, who was 76 and had been bringing Walter soup during bad weather for 15 years, and arranged for her to check on him daily during the week of the ceremony. Then I drove to Millbrook that Sunday and told Walter what was happening. He already knew. He sat across from me at his kitchen table with his coffee and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, I'll be in the 4th row. White dress shirt. You'll see me. I believed him. I should have believed harder in everything else he said that day too. He handed me an envelope as I was leaving. Sealed. My name on the front in his handwriting. The precise, unhurried print of a man who had spent his career reading blueprints. Don't open it yet, he said. Put it in your jacket for the ceremony. If something's wrong, you'll know to open it. If nothing's wrong, bring it back to me. I looked at him. What do you think is wrong? He looked at his coffee. I need someone I trust to tell me the truth. I can't read the statements myself anymore. The print appointment's too small and I misplace my glasses. And I don't want to ask anyone who has a reason to lie. I put the envelope in my interior jacket pocket. I told myself it was probably nothing. He was 81. He worried. That was reasonable. I drove home and told myself that twice more before I fell asleep. The pain had been building for weeks. Dark stool. A burn below my sternum that I had been professionally, expertly, almost impressively ignoring. I am a nurse. I understand that clinical knowledge and self-care exist in almost complete opposition in this profession. We are very good at identifying danger in other people and very skilled at explaining away the same signs in ourselves. I knew what it was. I also had an NCLEX exam in 3 weeks, and a pinning ceremony in 6, and a grandfather to check on, and night shifts 3 times a week, and I had no time to be a patient. The morning of May 20th, I ran on 4 hours of sleep and 2 ibuprofen and the specific adrenaline of a day you've been pointing toward for 3 years. Grandpa was in the 4th row exactly where he said he'd be. White dress shirt, brass watch chain. He raised one hand when he saw me in the processional line, and I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with the ulcer. Around him, empty seats. The seats my mother and brother and Sloan would have occupied if they had been there instead of 30,000 feet over the Atlantic in the first-class cabin my grandfather's savings had paid for, though I did not know that yet. They called my name at 10:47 a.m. I stepped forward. The room tilted. A hot wave from my sternum to my throat. I reached for the podium. Missed. The last thing I heard before the floor came up was my grandfather's voice from the 4th row, cutting through the auditorium's confused murmur. Clear and immediate. The voice of a man who does not panic because he has decided panicking is not useful. I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm right here. Then everything went dark. Perforated gastric ulcer. Emergency laparoscopic surgery. 2 units of packed red blood cells. A surgical team that later told me, with the particular careful tone medical professionals use when they want you to understand something without frightening you retrospectively, that another 30 minutes would have been a different conversation. The hospital called my family 8 times. My mother's cell phone, 4 calls. My brother Brett's cell, 3 calls. The emergency contact I'd listed, my mother, received a voicemail at 10:52 a.m. That explained in plain language that her daughter had collapsed and was being prepared for emergency surgery. Nobody picked up. They were at cruising altitude. Phones off. Champagne poured. A 9-hour flight to Charles de Gaulle with lie-flat seats that my grandfather's account had funded, though I did not know that yet. My grandfather signed my surgical consent forms at 11:34 a.m. His hand was shaking, the surgical coordinator told me later. He sat in the family waiting area alone for 4 hours. He did not call anyone. He did not post on social media. He sat in a plastic chair in a hospital waiting room and waited, because that is what you do when someone you love is in surgery and there is nothing else to be done. When they told him I was out and stable, he went into the family bathroom and cried for approximately 5 minutes, which I know because the surgical coordinator, a woman named Joyce Pemberton, 22 years in patient services at Hartford Hospital, the person who told me all of this with the careful steadiness of someone who has delivered difficult context many times, was walking past and heard him. Then he washed his face, straightened his shirt, went to find my room, and he put the brass pocket watch on my tray so it would be ticking when I woke up. I woke up on day 2. I lay still for a while and listened to the watch and looked at the ceiling and took an internal inventory the way they teach you. Pain, present, and managed. IV, right hand. NG tube, removed. Good. Grandfather, asleep in the chair and in the same shirt he'd been wearing for 2 days. Then I picked up my phone. The Instagram photograph first, then I scrolled back. Sloan's post from the previous evening, the Eiffel Tower, the champagne. Finally, no stress, no drama. My mother had commented a heart emoji. My brother had commented a sunglasses emoji, posted while I was in the ICU. I set the phone down, picked up the water glass on my tray. My hand was steady, which surprised me. Then the missed calls loaded, 65 of them. I scrolled through the timestamps the way you scroll through a patient chart, looking for the clinical picture, the pattern, the thing that tells you what's actually happening. My mother, 3:07 a.m., Paris time. Greta, call me immediately. Brett, 3:41 a.m. Mom's card got declined at the hotel. We need Grandpa to call the credit union and tell them to release the hold. Can you get him to do that tonight? Brett again, 4:15 a.m. The hotel is charging Mom's personal card now. This is a significant amount. Fix this. Sloan, 4:22 a.m. Greta, this is really embarrassing. We can't pay for dinner. Do you understand how that feels? My mother, 4:47 a.m. Why aren't you answering? We need you right now. 65 calls and messages. Not one of them asked if I was alive. The hospital had called my mother 4 times. She had seen the Hartford area code at some point during the night. She had decided, apparently, that whatever was happening in Hartford was less urgent than the frozen credit line at a Paris hotel. I held the phone for a long time. Then I set it face down on the tray next to the watch, and I remembered the envelope. Joyce Pemberton had retrieved my blazer from the auditorium and hung it in the room's small closet. I asked her to bring it to me. The envelope was still in the interior pocket, still sealed. I opened it. Bank statements. From an account at a credit union my mother didn't know existed. A secondary account my grandfather had opened 18 months ago, his name only. Statements mailed to a P.O. box in Millbrook. He had been watching. Quietly, carefully, in the way of a man who has learned over 81 years not to act until he is certain. I read the statements twice. Then I picked up the pen from the hospital tray and started circling. March 15th, 18th, transfer out $3,200. Memo, Diane Briggs, POA. March 29th, transfer out $2,800. Same memo. April 10th, transfer out $4,100. April 14th, charge $6,340. Memo, Prestige Travel Agency, Paris CDG. April 18th, pharmacy auto pay returned. Insufficient funds. The charge, $4,780. His metoprolol, his heart medication had bounced. While my mother used his power of attorney to book first-class seats to Paris, his cardiac prescription had returned unpaid. I went through 11 months of statements with that pen, circling in blue, adding in the margin. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. When I was done, the number at the bottom of my notations was $31,000. $31,000. Transferred out of Walter Briggs's account over 11 months, including $6,000 for flights that had put my family 30,000 feet over the Atlantic while I was bleeding on a surgical table with no one to sign my consent forms, but an 81-year-old man who'd been ironing his dress shirt at 6 that morning. My hands were not shaking. That was the thing I noticed most. My hands were completely, absolutely still. I picked up my phone and dialed a number that wasn't my mother's. Connecticut Adult Protective Services. The intake line operates 24 hours. The woman who answered was named Sandra Chu. She identified herself as a senior intake specialist, 12 years with the APS Financial Exploitation Unit. She had the particular steady quality of someone who has heard many versions of this story and treats each one with the same careful attention. I told her what I had. I use clinical language because that is the language I think in. Documented transfers, power of attorney, pharmacy auto pay returned for insufficient funds, total estimated misappropriation over 11-month period. I told her about the Paris trip, about the hotel fraud alert that had triggered when the credit union froze my grandfather's accounts due to unusual transfer patterns, the same fraud alert that had generated my family's 65 panicked calls. The credit union, it turned out, had flagged the account 6 weeks earlier and placed a soft hold pending review. My mother had managed around it for a while. The hard freeze had hit while she was at dinner in Paris. The 65 calls were not about me. They were about the money running out. Sandra Chu took my information with careful, unhurried thoroughness. She assigned a case number, APS 2024-04471, and told me a field investigator would contact my grandfather directly within 72 hours. Before she hung up, she said, "Ms. Briggs, what you're describing is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You did the right thing calling." I said thank you and ended the call. Then I put the bank statements back in the envelope, put the envelope in my blazer pocket, and lay back against the hospital pillow. The watch ticked. My grandfather was still asleep in his chair, his chest rising and falling slowly, his dress shirt wrinkled from 2 days of hospital chair sleeping. "I need someone I trust to tell me the truth," he'd said. I had the truth, all of it, circled in blue. Now I needed the right room to put it in. Daniel Osei was my grandfather's personal attorney. He'd handled Walter's affairs for 14 years, estate planning, the trust documents, 2 property transactions when Grandpa sold the Millbrook Workshop building and the lot behind it. He was 53, methodical, the kind of attorney who keeps physical files in addition to digital ones because he has learned that digital files can be questioned, and physical files with original signatures are harder to argue with. I called him from the hospital the morning of day 3. He answered on the first ring. He already knew I was there. Joyce Pemberton had tracked down Walter's emergency contacts after the surgery, and Daniel was listed. He'd been waiting to hear from me directly. I told him about the statements. Silence for 11 seconds. I counted. Then, "Greta, your grandfather needs to revoke the power of attorney immediately. Today, if possible. Can you do it from here? From the hospital? I can be there in 90 minutes. He was there in 70. Daniel Osei arrived in a gray suit with a document satchel and the quiet urgency of a man who understands what $31,000 in unauthorized transfers means in the context of elder financial law. He sat with my grandfather, who had woken up, had coffee from the family lounge, and was now entirely alert in the way he always was when something important was happening, and explained what the statements showed, slowly and without softening. My grandfather listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise. He signed the revocation of power of attorney with a hand that did not shake. Effective immediately, Daniel said, "Your daughter has no access to your accounts as of this document." He filed it electronically with the county recorder's office from his phone while still in the hospital room. Then he looked at me. "The APS case number. Do you have it?" I gave it to him. He wrote it on the inside cover of the file. "We'll want to talk about civil recovery," he said, "but that's for later. Right now, the priority is making sure she can't move anything else." "It's already frozen," I said. "The credit union flagged it 6 weeks ago." Daniel looked at me for a moment. "You were 3 steps ahead of this before you woke up." "I'm a nurse," I said. "We assess fast." I went home on day 5. My mother landed at JFK on May 25th and called me 4 times before her car service reached the highway. I let all 4 go to voicemail. The messages escalated in the way her messages always escalated, starting with a tone that assumed I would be apologetic and ending with a tone that assumed I was being unreasonable. "Greta, I heard you had a health scare. I hope you're feeling better. We need to talk about some financial confusion with your grandfather's account. Greta, the credit union is saying there's some kind of freeze. I need you to help me sort this out. Call me. Greta, I know you're upset, but this is a family matter and it needs to stay that way. Call me immediately." The 4th one was just my name, repeated twice, with the particular emphasis of a woman woman who is used to that being enough. I did not call her back. What I did? I drove to Millbrook. I sat with my grandfather at his kitchen table and sorted his medications into the weekly organizer the way I had every Sunday for 3 years. I made sure his metoprolol prescription had been refilled. Daniel had called the pharmacy directly and ensured the account was current. I made dinner. We ate. He told me about the electrical job he'd done in 1987 on a building in Hartford that was being converted into condominiums now, and about the union contract dispute of 1979, and about my grandmother, who had been gone for 12 years, and who he still talked about in the present tense sometimes when he forgot to catch himself. Before I left, he pressed the brass watch into my hand. "Take it for a while," he said. "It kept good time for you in the hospital." I held it. The weight of it was specific and familiar. "Grandpa, you're going to want this back. I know where to find it," he said. The meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after my surgery. My mother had been calling, texting, sending messages through Brett, asking me to come talk as a family, work this out together, keep it private. I had agreed to come. I had not told her what I was bringing. I arrived at her house at 2 p.m. with a manila folder. Inside, 11 months of bank statements, every transfer circled in blue. The APS case file, including case number APS 2024-04471, and the name of the assigned investigator, Marcus Webb, 15 years with Connecticut APS, Financial Exploitation Specialist. The revocation of power of attorney, signed, notarized, filed. And a letter from Daniel Osei on his firm's letterhead, dated May 24th, summarizing the documented transfers and noting that the matter had been referred to APS and that civil recovery proceedings were under consideration. My mother had prepared her own materials. Memory care brochures, fanned across the coffee table like a hand of cards. 3 of them, the kind with soft focus photographs of elderly people in sunlit common rooms. Brett and Sloan were there. Brett had the expression of a man who has been briefed on a strategy and is committed to it. Sloan had her phone face down on her knee, which was, for Sloan, an unusual restraint. My mother spoke first. "Your grandfather has been confused lately." Her voice had the texture of someone who has rehearsed. "We've been concerned for a while. The account activity. He authorized things and then didn't remember. It happens with age. We're looking at some options for his care going forward." She gestured at the brochures. I said nothing. If anyone's been telling him things, filling his head with, she glanced at me. He's vulnerable right now, and I think some people have been taking advantage of that vulnerability during a difficult time. She let that sit. Brett nodded. Sloan's jaw tightened. My mother turned toward the doorway. My grandfather walked in. He was wearing his jacket. The brass watch chain caught the afternoon light from the window. He had driven himself, which I had arranged and which my mother had not expected, because she had called Petra Halverson 3 days ago and told her that Walter was not well and shouldn't be driving. And Petra, who had known my grandfather for 20 years and had my cell phone number, had called me immediately. My mother's face moved through several things very quickly. "Dad," she started, in the voice she used on children, soft, simplified. "Why don't you sit down? We were just having a family conversation." My grandfather sat down. My mother leaned forward slightly. "Dad, can you tell everyone what day it is? Just, sometimes it helps to orient." My grandfather reached into his jacket pocket. The brass watch came out. He opened it with the snap that sounds like a period at the end of a sentence. He looked at the face. Saturday, May 28, 2:14 p.m. He closed the watch. He looked at my mother with the expression of a man who has been deciding something for a long time and has finally decided. "Over the past 11 months, Diane transferred $31,000 from my account without my knowledge or consent, including $6,340 for first-class flights to Paris." The room didn't move. "I know this," he said, because my granddaughter read me the statements. I laid the manila folder on top of the memory care brochures. 11 months of statements, I said. Every transfer is circled. The APS case number is on the second page. The power of attorney was revoked on May 23rd, signed and notarized. Daniel Osei filed it the same day. I looked at my mother. Her access has been revoked for 8 days. Brett said nothing. He was looking at the folder the way people look at things they can't argue with. Sloan picked up her phone, put it back down. My mother's face changed. The careful, rehearsed softness cracked open, and underneath it was not remorse. It was fury. The specific fury of someone who has run a play and watched it fail, who has arranged the board and found a different game happening. "After everything I've sacrificed for this family," she said. Her voice was low and tight. "After everything I gave up, everything I put in." My grandfather turned the watch over in his hands. His thumb moved across the engraving on the back. The date, 1971, his father's initials. He looked at my mother. 38 years, Diane, he said. A pause. "And you couldn't wait." The APS investigation concluded 4 months later. Marcus Webb, the assigned investigator, is a methodical man with a 15-year record in financial exploitation cases and a gift for documentation that Daniel Osei described as, in a professional compliment, almost surgical. The final report cited $31,000 in unauthorized transfers over 11 months, including charges inconsistent with the stated purpose of the power of attorney and a pharmacy lapse that constituted a failure of duty of care. The report was forwarded to the Connecticut State's Attorney's Office. My mother's attorney negotiated a civil settlement. Full restitution of $31,000 returned to my grandfather's account in 2 installments. No criminal charges were filed, which was my grandfather's decision, made quietly and after considerable thought, and which I supported without without entirely understanding. He said, "She's still my daughter. That doesn't go away because she did a wrong thing. It just means she did a wrong thing and we're done pretending otherwise." That was his call to make. I made mine. I was not present for the settlement meetings. I did not negotiate on my mother's behalf. I did not smooth anything over or keep anything quiet or absorb any portion of the family's discomfort to make the situation more manageable. That was new for me, not being useful in that particular way. It left a strange space I didn't know how to fill at first. I filled it with work. I passed the NCLEX on my first attempt, 6 weeks after surgery, still moving carefully around a healing abdomen and still sleeping more than I wanted to. My preceptor, charge nurse Adizi Nwosu, 18 years in acute care, the person who taught me to read a rapid deterioration before the monitors caught it, said when she handed me my first solo assignment, "I heard what happened at your graduation. I want you to know, you made it here the hard way. That means something on this floor. I've been on the floor for 7 months now. I'm good at it." Grandpa was right about that, which does not surprise me. My grandfather has his accounts back, his medications current, a trust structure that Daniel rebuilt from scratch with safeguards that don't require anyone to hold power of attorney over anything. He drives himself to Millbrook Diner on Tuesday mornings and reads 2 newspapers. He calls me on Sunday evenings.